All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome back for another episode of In Liberty and Health. This is going to be a very interesting show. I've had over the last couple months definitely more left-leaning people on more recently, and I believe my guest would probably consider herself more so in that camp, but I'll let her speak for herself here in a minute. But let me do my usual shilling and all that stuff first. A Common Crown is just going absolutely awesome. I can't wait for you guys to hear the new music. We have 6 new songs that are pretty damn well on their way, and I think you guys are really, really going to like it. Definitely different from our old stuff, but you'll still recognize it. So make sure you go to commoncrown.com to find us there. Obviously, follow me on all podcatchers, all that good stuff. Tiger Fitness through the links below. Fox and Sons Coffee, use code Kyle at checkout, and Deemed Fit and use code Sarah Matovic, which should be down below, and the code should auto-populate if you hit the link down there. But we're going to talk about deprogramming from the NATO Western propaganda and all that stuff. And obviously a lot more, because I think that we have a lot in common, some stuff that we might disagree on, but I've listened to enough shows of hers and some of our mutual friends that she's interviewed, and I think they've interviewed as well. And I think this will be a really, really good episode. So without further ado, let's get right into it. All right, I should have covered this before the show, but hopefully I get this right. And my last name is very difficult to say, so I know how it goes. Miss Fiorella Isabel. Did I nail that?
Fiorella.
Okay. I feel like I was close.
You were close. You were close. You were close. Just the
Good.
pronunciation. But yeah, Fiorella. Yeah.
Okay. How are you?
I'm doing good. I'm getting over a minor cold, but hanging in there.
Yeah, of course. So why don't you tell my audience what you're about, and we'll kind of go from there. I think I laid a little bit of an introduction out there, but I obviously, like I said, I wanted you to speak for yourself.
Well, what I'm about. I mean, in terms of work, I'm a journalist and correspondent as well as geopolitical analyst. I tend to travel a lot of places. I've covered elections a lot with Craig Pasta, Jardula, who has probably been on your show. I've done following a lot of events like Assange events with Misty, who you've also had on and who I see loves you. And so I have kind of focus very much on independent journalism, and now I'm in Moscow and I'm doing some work here, and it's been a huge journey. Initially I was focused on electoral politics more so, like in terms of what we're seeing now with Trump, Kennedy, Kamala, and all these people. What we're seeing here discussed now, I focused on that a lot, especially 8 years ago with the Bernie Sanders, I guess, campaign that came out and pretty much gave hope to a lot of people. And then we all know how that ended up. And it was terrible, of course, but it really made me realize, and Pasta and I started our own YouTube show from that, because we sort of understood that there was a need for knowledge and for people to escape this propaganda, especially in California and Los Angeles, where we came from an entertainment background. We were both actors, and we were both also, well, I was always a writer as well. I was always writing. And I wanted to really focus on the things that aren't talked about in Los Angeles, like the housing crisis, like the fact that so many people are poor, and there were so many problems that were seeping through the entirety of Los Angeles then, and now it's 10,000 times worse. And I know because I've been back since, and it's horrible. But it was about understanding that people in the local areas, even people who met well and did a lot of things to help each other, really didn't understand anything about foreign policy. And so now where I'm at, I'm basically mostly exclusively focused on foreign policy and on elections, but from a geopolitical foreign policy perspective. For example, like Venezuela's elections, where the United States has been trying to interfere in those elections, which my whole thing is, no matter how people feel about a country, whether they agree or disagree, it is up to the people of those countries. It is not up to us to interfere. We believe in national sovereignty. And so that's sort of been the trajectory going from a more US focused politics to covering international politics all over the world. And I just got back from Iraq where I attended a conference, and that was just super, super enlightening, especially at this time.
Yeah, that's all really, really interesting stuff. It's funny you mentioned Venezuela because I know that was in the news about a week or two ago. But I had Anya Parmpill on about a week or two ago, and we kind of covered quite a bit of that stuff as well. I think she's probably one of the best experts, at least that I know of, on Venezuelan politics. And like you said, and I think most reasonable people would agree, no matter how we feel about a lot of these countries, um, the people should decide how their countries are ran. And this is kind of where it gets into my background a little bit because I come from a blue collar background with lots of conservative, more right leaning people. And it was kind of funny to see all these people saying that the Trump base is so anti war and they're, so non interventionist. But then as soon as, there's a dictator, quote unquote, down, in one of those Southern American countries, that we don't like, then, oh, by all means, we should have regime change down there. And,
Right.
you have people who ran for Congress that are supposed to be isolationists and Ron Paul guys saying that, we should decapitate, who was it, Cuban leaders or stuff like that. It's like, what the hell's going on here? Like, we're supposed to be isolationists and America first. This ain't very America first, if you ask me, at least.
Well, yeah, so that's my whole thing with the America First. Like, if it was America First, I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Right.
But what I feel like it's turned into is the idea of America First means everybody else just gets to be screwed.
Mhm.
Continue to do this imperialist type of foreign policy while simultaneously the average American gets 0 out of it. You get nothing from it. And even if you did get something, it would still be bad. But I'm telling you that the average person gets nothing out of it. And so it's kind of like, what this is not America First at all to begin with. America First would be to get the country back to a country that is in some form or fashion actually run by the people and for the people. And that is not something that is a legitimate thing at all. And people say, well, this isn't a democracy. It was never a democracy. But it's not a republic either. We're not represented by these elected officials. People
Correct.
like Kamala Harris come into power without ever having gotten a single vote. She couldn't even win in her own state. So
Mhm.
what we're looking at here is a selection process of the most elite, most type establishment type of figures. And when we talk about Donald Trump, he is somebody that came in as an outsider, and many people had hoped that the same with Bernie on the left, Trump on the right. He was the populist, and I've always sort of compared the two, like they were like iterations of what people were looking for on those two spectrums. Like in the Bernie left, people were looking for somebody to focus on, healthcare and poverty and all of these things. And for Trump, it was the same thing, but it was coming from a different perspective, which is why during the 2016 primaries, let me remind everybody that Bernie Sanders got a lot of votes in West Virginia. He got a lot of votes in certain sectors that were conservative. And then those votes went to Donald Trump. And you see this
Mhm.
because the entire issue that we're seeing here is a class issue where we're having the majority of Americans of all ethnicities struggle, and it's no longer just blue collar, it's literally everybody that is struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do like that you bring it back to 2016 because that really does feel like a pivotal time in politics because, Donald Trump sucked a lot of the air out of the room. And I think a lot of people kind of credit it to more of like Ron Paul kind of running in 2008 and 2012 and him kind of developing that more anti war fervor amongst the right. And then Trump kind of sucking all the oxygen out of the room and being somebody to speak to people like, my coworkers' grievances, rightfully so. But, much like Bernie Sanders, it does almost feel like everybody's been sold out by their politicians, especially by
Yeah.
Donald Trump. And
Mhm.
like, at least on the left, you can nakedly realize, like, hey, for the last 3 elections, you guys had no representation amongst the Democrats. I mean, they stole it from Bernie Sanders in 2016. Joe Biden was just, the transparently most
Yeah.
like swampiest presidential elected person that they could possibly find. And then Kamala Harris now being shoehorned in there is just the same deal. There was no representation amongst the last 3 elections. But, it's almost frustrating for me to watch all the right wingers justify everything that Trump has done when it's like he kept Fauci on the job and spent all this money. And then, his first presidency ended in 2020, which was, probably one of the worst years in American history, at least recent American history. But people are still sticking their head in the sand, like, oh, if we just get him in, now look, he has Tulsi Gabbard and RFK on his team. But, what do they have in common? They both want to fund Israel. They both want to fight terror wars. And people could say Trump doesn't want to do that, but I mean, his record speaks to something completely differently. So, at least on
Yeah.
the left, it seems like you guys, like more the dissident left, you, Jimmy Dore, Pasta, Misty, a lot of you guys kind of realize like there's nobody representing us. Where I feel like a lot of the people on the right spectrum are still like, man, we're holding out hope for Trump. But for me, I'm looking at this, I'm like, man, you guys, I don't know how anybody has hope at this point, at least at like the federal political level.
Yeah, no, I mean, electoral politics is not going to save us. And this is something that I ranted with Misty about not
Mm,
too long ago, like last week, because I have come to the conclusion, especially not only after Bernie Sanders was cheated twice, and he sort of admitted it last time in a way, like not fully, but sort of, but then said Joe Biden was his friend, and and therefore we need to support Kamala Harris, who Kamala Harris is literally a neoliberal. And this is my issue with the right, is they call her a communist. She is a neoliberal
right.
through and through.
Right.
Okay. Even if like there's no way. And she is horrible. She is absolutely terrible. I did a lot of actually opposition research during the time she was Tulsi Gabbard was running against
Mhm.
her for that, because I wanted Kamala Harris out, because I knew how horrible she was living in California, and she was severely disliked. And so there is just this sort of thing where it's really strange. And I gotta say, the left is just as bad as the right, though. It's almost like the
Mhm.
blue MAGA and the red MAGA. You have
Yeah.
these two iterations, and they're supposed to be something different, but they're almost like the same thing. And like
Mhm.
what we're seeing is there's just rebranded versions of the Democratic and Republican establishment. It's a
Mhm.
sort of controlled opposition that I'm seeing here. Like Kamala Harris said something in her very lunatic pro Zionist rant
Mhm.
about how she will stand with Israel, and at the end she was like, but the children, oh, that's very bad, and blah blah blah. And people are like, yeah, see, she mentioned Palestine, she mentioned Gaza, but the actions of the Biden administration, which is essentially the same administration that Kamala will
Right.
be in, right? It literally have funded this genocide. And Donald Trump is competing and saying, hey, I'm going to be better for Israel. And
Right.
all of the people around him are salivating to go to war with Iran. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, maybe, we'll get like a shift perhaps in the Ukraine war, but that's not a given either. Because
Right.
again, there's a lot of things that are being said right now at the campaigning level. You have to watch what these people have done before, their policies.
Exactly.
Kamala doesn't have any right now, and Donald Trump has been president before, and Operation Warp Speed and all of these other things that he promised he wouldn't do, that he would drain the swamp. He put in the most sociopathic, like CIA stooges in his administration, from John Bolton. And like John Bolton is probably the worst of them, okay? Because he
Mhm.
is like, I mean, he's evil, that man.
Right.
And how do we forget what he did in terms of killing Soleimani, in terms of the Caesar Act in Syria? He was trying to expand the Zionist takeover of the entire region. So I just don't see how he's just going to do something different. And I feel like he is controlled opposition.
Yeah.
And I think right now, when, we're playing this sort of like, um, what's that superhero movie? I like, what is it, like like, I don't know, the latest
The
superhero
Avengers?
movie, The Avengers. That's what I'm talking. I
Okay,
I
yeah.
clearly don't watch them because, but
Fine.
the Avengers, right?
Right.
They put in Tulsi Gabbard as
Yeah.
like Wonder Woman or whatever. It's like
Yeah.
this is just ridiculous, but it's so representative of the
Mm.
United States and where we are. Sadly.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And much to your point about Kamala Harris and even Joe Biden, this has been one of the most frustrating things about the right wing today is that you guys have like this huge pocket ace to slam the Biden Harris administration on is that they've been more hawkish than Trump when it comes to China. They've been, sailing more warships through there, or
Yeah.
defense guarantees to the Philippines, sending more weapons to Taiwan, so much worse than anything that, the previous administrations have done. But then usually the narrative there is that, oh, well, he's not tough enough on China or even like Iran, he's not tough enough on Iran. And then when it comes to Kamala, she's all in on Israel. But what do we hear? Oh, well, she's anti Semitic because she didn't choose Josh Shapiro. And it's like she is married to a Jewish guy. And like,
Yeah.
I don't care about that. It's the fact that it's not true. You have a pocket ace right there to say, hey, she's screwing the American people because they want to provide, defense guarantees to the Philippines. And then they're still all about fighting this war for Israel. Why don't we just say, hey, we're going to keep all that money back here at home for the people? There are just so many pocket aces that are being left on the table. But once again, Trump is completely bought off by the Adelson family, and so is RFK. And then
Yeah.
Tulsi Gabbard's a huge Zionist, and she said herself, I'm a hawk on terror. So guess what? You can't hit them on that angle because guess what? You want to do it worse than they do. It's just mind-boggling that once again, all this political capital here that could be considered America first is left on the table and just nothing.
It's honestly, what hurts me the most is seeing people fall for it after all
Right.
this time. People who should know better, people who have gone through, and I just see it online. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, this is don't let yourself get carried away by this. This is absolutely ridiculous. This is not going to benefit anybody. I'm not voting in this election. I don't
Either.
care who wins the presidency or who wins, because at the end of the day, I can tell you from studying elections all over the world, the United States does not have fair and free elections. In my opinion, I haven't seen the way elections are handled in other countries in a process with security, chain of custody, and all these things. That doesn't exist in the United States. And it doesn't exist not because it can't, but it's because it's by design. And they confuse people and make it about Republicans want this, Democrats want that. No, it's the entire system doesn't want an actual process where we would choose. Because if you look at the entirety of Congress, half of these people don't even read anything that they
Mhm.
sign, and they don't need to because it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter. They're not really in control. And so what we have is a completely rotten system to the core, and that system cannot be fixed by voting somebody in, because we're not giving the fair mechanism to actually have somebody that is actually a good person to lead us, and that person alone wouldn't be able to do it because we have an entire Congress, save like one or two people
Mhm.
that are complete and total trash. And then we have, we have all of these people that have bought our entire Congress, including
Mhm.
Adelson, including APAC, and
Right.
all of these um, uh, institutions of power. And you can't just vote that out. You need to have a different mechanism. And so for me, it's a matter of time as to when the American public is going to be ready to actually face that reality. Because right now, I don't think we're ready. I think what they're trying to push for is some sort of civil war,
Mhm.
some sort of, whether it's the Trumpers versus the Democrats or something along those lines, with also the border issue. I think they're trying to push something to where they're going to continue increasing the surveillance state and the powers of the surveillance state. They're going to continue increasing censorship, decreasing our rights, and essentially, we're going to end up worse in Europe, because Europe right now is ridiculous. The UK right now is ridiculous with their
Mhm.
arrest, with their ability to go after journalists. It is actually, I would say, the one part where they are worse than we are in the US, because we
Yeah.
do have the First Amendment, and like being in other countries and stuff, and seeing what they have and don't have. We do have, like, I will say, we do have a great foundation in the Constitution, the way it's laid out, but
Mhm.
it's not being respected. And so what I'm seeing here is like that's gonna not last very long. And I
Mhm.
think that, when something like January 6th or COVID or the election questioning or any sort of thing happens, they use these things, or a false flag attack to, of course, always expand the surveillance state.
Well, I'm kind of glad that you brought it to the surveillance state because I wanted to ask you. A lot of guys in the dissident right wing sphere are kind of excited about the JD Vance pick, right? So, if you're not familiar with JD Vance, which I'm guessing you might be a little bit, but JD Vance is kind of
Yeah.
backed by the whole PayPal mafia, right? And I've heard this narrative, and I'm a little skeptical of it, but obviously I want your thoughts that the PayPal mafia is backing Trump because they're going to dismantle the deep state or the managerial state, and the government's going to be less hostile to dissidents, people like us. I have some thoughts, but why don't you go ahead, go first, and give me your thoughts on JD Vance, the PayPal mafia backing Trump, and this idea that we're going to see some kind of different governance through this.
Well, I don't know much about the PayPal mafia, but I will say I don't think JD Vance is a reliable pick
Well,
based on
real,
the
real quick, I'm sorry to interrupt,
flip-flopping.
but it's like Peter Thiel, Mark Andreessen,
Oh, you mean
like
Peter Thiel? Okay.
yeah, so like a lot of
Yeah.
those guys, the big tech guys. I'm sorry to interrupt, but yeah.
Yeah, no, but why would I so Peter Thiel is not somebody you wanna rely on. Like, I don't
Mhm,
understand how that's supposed to be necessarily a good thing. I mean, right now we have very little choices, right? We have the Google, YouTube, and we have the Peter Thiels. We have, like,
mhm,
a lot of these just, big tech oligarchs and billionaires and entities coming in and trying to take hold of whatever corner they can. And that doesn't necessarily mean that giving your soul to one of them is going to benefit. What we're seeing is
mhm,
like these sort of like wars between these groups in terms of
mhm,
the more money that they could attain, more and more power. But really, at the end of the day, these people, from the Trumps to the Obamas and the Clintons and all of that, they run in the same circles. You
right,
you have you have a lot of these sort of friendships between Kim Kardashian, for example, and Trump's daughter Ivanka. They're
mhm,
like friends, and they're supposedly like in opposite ends of the political spectrum. But what we're talking about is that doesn't matter. We're talking about money. And so when you talk about somebody like JD Vance who switched from a Trump hater to a Trump supporter, I find that extremely suspect because all of us can have our own political development. But in terms of like somebody doing it at a convenient time and just flip flopping when it's like necessary, I just think that a lot of people were looking at JD Vance as like, okay, well maybe he's not that bad. He's at least some guy that comes from the working class, and he did this and that and whatever he wrote. I forgot the name.
hillbilly elegy.
The hillbilly elegy, yeah. And so it's kind of like I just find that like too coincidentally perfect to try to fit into this mold of Trump is representative of the working class. And I think that was initially what the Trump campaign was going for, but really when you're looking at a lot of his donors and a lot of the people who back him, it's a lot of people with money as well. So it's more of like these wars between people with money rather than anything else. And I just don't trust JD Vance as going to have anything politically or policy wise different that's going to alter any sort of of the Trump administration.
Yeah, and I largely agree. I guess my main concern when it comes to like the guys like Peter Thiel and all that, and what a lot of the guys would say is that, oh, well, they're not actively hostile. My concern
Yeah.
is, and the reason why I brought it back to survey, or why I was happy you brought it to surveillance, is because obviously we all know that Peter Thiel is the owner of Palantir, and
Yeah.
Palantir is this global spying apparatus. And what have we seen over the last about year or so? Ever since October 7th, you cannot criticize Israel. That is, you get canceled, debanked, thrown off all social media. And now, South Dakota, they have laws where you can't say anything bad about Jewish people or the Holocaust or anything like that. And like, regardless if, those criticisms hold water or not, I'm not here to discuss that. We should be able to discuss that without having to worry about being thrown in jail. So
Right.
my main concern with this JD Vance and this big tech bro kind of stuff and that expansion of surveillance is that, hey, what's going to happen in a year or two as this war in Gaza, if you even call it that, continues on, and then people like us are questioning the validity of our partnership with Israel. and they say that this is illegal. Okay, well, under a Trump administration, we know that they really, really like that little country over there, and they really want to go to war with Iran. So, what happens when people like us start questioning that? And then you have this giant spying apparatus that's watching everything you do. And maybe that's a little doom and gloom, but I mean, I think it's a legitimate fear, and I think a lot of people aren't ready for that, or at least ready to consider that that's a potential possibility.
No, I don't think it's doom and gloom at all. I think it is like too optimistic to think it's not going down that route. I mean, what we're
Mhm.
seeing now with the arrest of Pavel Durov, and you look, he's
Yeah.
a billionaire and he's a powerful guy and he's got a lot of powerful friends, and he ran away from Russia, which is ironic. And then, Russia tried to do something similar to control Telegram during the time when they were getting like accused of interfering in the elections and all of that was going on. And so Maria Zaharova pointed out, she's the Russian Foreign Ministry spokeswoman. She pointed it out. She was like, all those people, all these international human rights organizations that were saying we were violating human rights and blah, blah, blah. Where are they now? Are they going to go after, France and the EU for going after this guy? No, they're probably not. And so it's just
Mhm.
kind of ironic, like where we're at today, where it's like, yeah, like I think there's a difference between like countries protecting themselves from propaganda. At the same time, I kind of have like a weird sort of line, a case by case basis on countries like, say, Cuba or other countries that are like, okay, well, the United States is banning our content, so we're going to do
Mhm.
it too. We're going to ban their. It's like a tit for tat thing.
Mhm.
I'm not, necessarily for it, but I understand it. Whereas in the US, like we literally are doing everything we can to stop another narrative from coming, and we have so much power over that, over everything, like Hollywood,
Mhm.
from everything in the news. Everybody knows America, the United States of America, and what that is. Everybody knows our stories. Everybody hears our news. Everybody knows what CNN is, the New York Times is. And even if you go to a foreign country, you will see those channels everywhere. But if the United States, like they took down RT, they took down all these Russian channels, and now they're saying if you work with Russian media, you could be subjected to some sort of a further questioning and arrest and blah blah blah. And so now it's becoming like, is am I going to be detained? Am I going to be arrested? And I was
Right.
detained when I went back to the United States for 2 hours,
Mhm.
and I was questioned, and all of these things, and other people are being arrested and detained and all of these things. And so where does that, stop? Now that's taking it to another level, whereas in Russia, um you don't see it at that level. You really don't. And when we're talking about Julian Assange, the fact that
Mhm.
he was freed, yes, but he had to plead guilty to
Right.
something, and that was kind of a mixed emotions thing for a lot of us, because
Yeah.
it was great that he's free, but he really shouldn't have pled guilty because that sets a precedent. So now
Mhm.
I think we're coming to a point where I don't even want to say breaking point. I think things are going to get a lot worse from here on out, and I don't think we were ready for that.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to throw out black pills there, but yeah, I mean, I largely agree with you. Is that Julian Assange really shouldn't have had to plead guilty. Now they say that that does not set a legal precedent, but I think what that really means is that like there's a metaphorical precedent. There's not a
Yeah,
legal precedent, but people now know that hey, if you can get somebody, if you could just punish somebody enough, eventually they're going to plead
yeah,
guilty to the crime of journalism, and that's exactly what that was. And it's kind of frustrating to see Trump campaign on, well, I'm in their way, they're going after me because I'm in their way for going after you, when it's like someone like you or someone like Julian Assange, who Trump, planned to assassinate with Mike Pompeo.
yeah,
Just you don't hear about these average everyday people who get detained for minor things like that. But as soon as you see a billionaire or somebody that has the lawyers and the
yeah.
money to kind of combat that, you'll hear about that all day. But once again, people like you, just you never hear the light of day for that. And that to me is so frustrating. So you mentioned you did some opposition research on Kamala, so I'm sure that you probably know a little about Walls as well. So, what do you think about the announcement of Kamala Harris and Tim Walls, Coach Walls, as we're supposed to call him?
I just find it like, superficially, it's a very odd pairing.
Mhm.
I think it's very very strange. But what I think they're trying to do is pick the least threatening potential candidate who really nobody really knew about, but who in progressive circles, of the progressive left, they could get somebody to say, "Oh, look, he's so cute. He's like a grandpa, and he says all the right things because he said,
Mhm.
he always repeats this phrase about reading books. We need kids reading books, and the Republicans want to ban books." And so he'll say things like that will sound good to a mildly educated progressive 20 something year old that really doesn't know much and has been brainwashed into thinking via their liberal arts education that Donald Trump is a fascist and must be stopped. So they're like hoping that because Kamala Harris mentions Palestine once or twice and this guy mentions books, that hey, well, we're going to be the team that defeats Trump and all of these, fascists that are also going along with him. And it's kind of weird because in a superficial way it works. They're trying to get like Gen Z into it. There was like some sort of party at the DNC where it was like all these little memes that were being pushed out
Hotties for
were run
Harris.
by Gen Z. Yeah, it was like hot girls for yeah, for Harris
Hotties
or
for
something.
Harris, yeah.
Yeah, and like, which is like, okay, I get it, but it's first of all, it's really cringy, number 1. Number 2, I just don't really think the majority of people care. Only
Mhm,
the people that are really involved in these political circles are gonna care that are going to the DNC, but does the average person like Kamala Harris? No. Does the average person, have faith in Donald Trump? No. But I will say, like, based on my conversations with family members, because I have Trump supporting family members and I
mhm,
have liberal family members, and they always argue all the time about like every little thing. But so one of my family members that was initially is a liberal and stuff has said that maybe with Trump they will end the Ukraine war, so maybe that's a reason to vote for Trump. So Trump has really pushed uh, that part of it, and I think that will go far with some people. There are people saying, maybe Trump will stop nuclear war from happening because this situation with Russia is getting out of hand, and so I can see how Trump has an upper hand in
yeah,
that respect. But at the same time, the way, as you mentioned earlier, he's trying to out Zionist and out warmonger the Democrats
mhm.
is pushing a lot of people away. And some people say he's trying to lose on purpose. I don't know my point of view on that yet. I haven't quite sat down and thought of it, but
Mhm.
I'm starting to think about those things.
Yeah, well, when Trump when people always say, "Oh yeah, I believe Trump's gonna end the war in Ukraine." It's like, okay, well, now with the most recent aid bill, everybody credited him, Trump specifically, for passing that aid bill. And then when Trump was in power, he got impeached over that whole Ukraine gate. But then what was the other part of that? He caved. He sent the weapons in. The
Yeah.
weapons that Joe Biden and Barack Obama both said, "Hey, that's way too dangerous for us." He authorized a shipment. And then, on top of that, his whole campaign, he's bragged about how tough he was on Russia. So I don't know how people square that circle. I mean, Trump's just taking the political points and, good on him for at least being smart politically. But like his history, you couldn't tell that he would be, he'd want detente with Russia at this point because he brags about being tougher on Russia. Even in the debate with Biden in 2020,
Yeah.
he said, "Oh, yeah, I was way tougher on Russia than they all wanted me to be." And then people say, "Oh, well, he was tricked." How many times can you say somebody was tricked before you realize he's part of the whole fucking game here?
Well, but the whole thing, like, he was, tough on Russia, it's funny because this
Mhm.
is why I feel like this is all just, like, a WWE for us, because the
Kayfabe.
Democrats were the ones who pushed that Trump and Putin are best friends. The
Right.
Democrats were the ones who were constantly saying, Putin helped Trump win and
Right.
blah blah blah. So like, so it's almost like yes, people think that because of their propaganda
Mhm.
and because of certain, things. And Putin has said himself, actually, he did say this, that the Russians preferred Biden, and a lot
Yeah.
of people have thought about why he would say that if he was joking. I don't think he was joking. I think he was
Mm.
being serious in terms of just knowing what you get, and like the US
Right.
is just going to go expose itself further. But I mean, would a Trump presidency is it better like do most Russians view a Trump more favorable than Kamala Harris? I would say the majority in government would, the majority that are politically around would, but that's just give or take. The majority of people I've actually spoken to say it doesn't really matter for Russia because they're like done. They're like, okay, well, we're looking to the east, we're looking to
Mhm.
BRICS, we're looking to all these other things. We really don't need to worry about the US anymore. We don't need to cover it really that much anymore. Like they're done. They're so done with caring about what we think in a lot of ways, in terms of what our government is thinks or who they're going to elect or not. I think they understand that no matter who we elect, it's like, okay, well, the foreign policy is going to be, not to the benefit of the rest of the world.
Yeah, there's a libertarian named Tom Woods, and he has a really good saying where no matter whom you elect, you always get John McCain, and it's pretty accurate.
That's
But
pretty
yeah,
funny.
it's so funny because I remember when Trump was finally pressed on how he would end the Ukraine war, he literally said, I'll tell Ukraine I'll give them more than
Yeah.
they've ever gotten before, or I'll tell Putin I'll give Ukraine more than they've ever gotten before if he doesn't stop, and I'll tell Ukraine that they need to stop or something like that. Like I was like, okay, so you're gonna do exactly what got us into the war to end the war? Like, how does that to me that math ain't math in there. But I'm glad that you brought it back to Moscow as well, because I know that you've lived over there for a period of time and you're there right now, correct?
Yeah, I am here.
Okay, so how has that been? And I think people have this idea of Moscow in their heads that like maybe it's some insane, awful place. But I feel like, us as Americans, we're so propagandized, especially about China, and probably to like a slightly lesser degree, Russia. Maybe over the last couple of years, maybe about on par with China. But I feel like we're really propagandized when it comes to any country that isn't the US.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, Moscow is probably one of the most beautiful, most metropolitan, industrialized cities I have ever been in. I mean,
Oh,
it's
wow.
probably, I would say, it's more beautiful than Paris. A lot of people, especially now, where France is at, a lot of people think that when they come to Russia, they expect like, even in the summer, like minus 40 degrees and everybody in the snow and very unhappy and mean and there's nothing to do and everybody's just sitting and freezing their ass off. Like I think that's the picture that, and tanks everywhere.
Yeah.
But that's not the reality. The reality is Moscow is extremely cosmopolitan. People have it's just I mean there are lights everywhere, whereas in Europe they're turning them off. In Moscow there are lights everywhere, there are fountains everywhere. They have taken the 90s fall of the Soviet Union and turned it around very, very much so. There's a lot of industrialization that needs to take place. There's a lot of a potential for industry, which is what's being discussed in all of these summits that we've seen throughout the last couple of years. There's so much land, it is so vast and big. There's so much diversity culturally, but you don't really see the squabbles that we have because you don't have the same type of background, right? In Russia, like it was a little bit different, and so it's very interesting how things are developing and how new industries are developing. There's a lot of wealth here in terms of minerals, in terms of oil, in terms of gas, in terms of all of these things, and
Mhm.
I understand why the United States and Europe want to tap into that. There's a lot of that. In fact, there was an exposition recently at this park called Videnka, and it's like a park where it used to house all the states that were part of the Soviet Union, Azerbaijan, Belarus, and so people walk through this park, and there's usually exhibitions where those this exhibition for like a few months, a long time, that basically gave you a glimpse into what every region of Russia, from Siberian region or
Mhm.
Novosibirsk to Vladivostok in the Far East to St. Petersburg, Moscow area, and all of that. So for me, the most amazing thing about here is the transportation. The metro is phenomenal. Moscow wouldn't survive without it, really. It's
Mhm.
amazing. The architecture, the restaurants, the life, the parks. I mean, people here are very, very family oriented. I would say they're a few years behind in terms of like that social cultural development that we're at, where we're,
Certainly.
what a lot of people call, the woke thing. Or I don't really like to label it as woke, because I woke or anti woke are kind of two focuses to me that are part of the same thing, because people hyper focus on it. But for me,
Mhm.
it's more of like they're focused more on like traditional family values, but it's
Sure.
only a certain group of people. You have a lot of the younger people that are like 20 years old, right? And under, especially. And they're very much like fixated on their phones and, curious about the United States. They still look at the United States positively overall.
Mm.
They're much more liberal minded. And then you have the population that's the adults that are a little bit older, and into the grandparents age. The majority of those people I've talked to really miss the Soviet Union, and they
Mm.
miss a lot of the things that it provided, and they speak nostalgically and positively about what it was before the later years. And so it's been interesting hearing from all sorts of Russians, because I don't just talk to Russians in politics or in government, or people who are just it's not like everybody here just sits with like a statue of Putin that they pray to every day. That's not the reality. Even where at RT, it's definitely not the reality. But it gives me a glimpse that there is a diversity in the political thought here. And it's a capitalist country. I mean, it's not a socialist country, but it does
Mhm.
have socialist elements in terms of providing healthcare. By the way, you don't pay your healthcare. Healthcare is extremely affordable. Your employer
Mm.
provides it, or the state. Same with education. Extremely affordable, and it's usually provided by the state. And that's those sorts of things still have remnants of
Mhm.
the Soviet Union.
Yeah, that's I always find these kind of talks about different countries to be absolutely fascinating. As you were talking, I'm like, man, I should just interview more people around the world. I had Jason Smith on a couple weeks ago who lives in China, and he was originally from, I think, somewhere here in the States. And just the pictures that people paint of the countries that they're living in after they came from the United States. I've never heard anybody go over to another country and do what they do here. So basically, like, I'm sure you're familiar with, okay, so like the situation in Venezuela, where a lot of people leave Venezuela and then they go to Miami or Florida and they advocate for regime change from, for the US to go down and regime change
Yeah.
Florida. I never hear people leave the US and then, go say, oh, China or Russia should go do something with the US. It always seems like people like they go to a different country and they're just like, yeah, this is actually really nice. Like the people are nice. It's very
Yeah.
cultural. Even like I said, like China, you would expect the Western version we hear of China. Oh my God, there's a social credit score. They're committing genocide against the Uyghurs, and oh, you don't want to go over there. And then like the stories here, oh no, it's lovely. There's lots of industry, all these small little restaurants, and then your stories with Russia, where it's just like the people are very socially conservative back then, but like the younger people a little bit more progressive. It's almost like globally we are kind of connected and not too
Yeah.
far apart in a lot of respects. So I'm not sure if you have anything to add there. I do got a couple more questions about Russia, but yeah, if you had anything to add.
No, absolutely. It's absolutely true. And like I think, it depends on who you talk to, like a lot of people who are foreign and have come here tend to just talk to Westerners or to certain people in Russia that are just like of a certain, involved in the government or something. But if you
Mhm.
talk to like the average Russian, or outside of Moscow too, if you go to smaller cities outside of Moscow, that's the real Russia, I would say. I've been to Donbass
Mhm.
and
Okay.
outer cities in Russia. And I think you start to get a sense of like the Russian pride and why they support majorly, especially outside of Moscow, support the special military operation, why they supported Putin going in, and
Mhm.
and the patriotism that they have in terms of the sacrifices they made during the Second World War and how many they've lost. And you start really seeing that and what it means. And you understand that we really, the United States, yes, we went into the war, but we've put out this narrative that it was us, we saved the day, Captain America came in, and it was, that was it. And we
Yeah.
completely push out the Soviet Union and the millions and millions of men that they lost, and the effect and the impact that had. Well, I think that's why you're seeing this resilience from Russia now.
Mhm. Yeah, that's like I said, it's very, very interesting. And that was kind of the other thing. And my understanding of the Ukraine-Russia war is probably better than the average person, not as good as like all the anti-war guys who are like some of my best friends. But my understanding is that like, okay, so the people overwhelmingly in what was it, 2013 or 14-ish, they overwhelmingly
14.
wanted to be a part of Russia, the people of the Donbass area, and a lot of those people were ethnically Russian. I'm guessing it's probably a little bit similar to the like Taiwan China situation where like the people of that area, even if they were like more Ukrainian, they probably looked at like the people who might have been more Russian, probably looked at those people as like friendly neighbors, families, people like that. But though, now you get governments, and specifically one government that had a lot of Western influence on it, and they start shelling that area. And then, because Russia, my understanding now from you is that they're a very, very prideful people, and they're very, very proud of their country. They feel right to defend, their own people from what they consider to be a hostile foreign enemy, attacking them. So, I don't think anybody reasonable, at least anybody from our perspective, would say Putin's this upstanding, great person. But at the same time, you can look at his actions and say, kind of get why he did what he did is because he's been pushed at every single step of the way.
Yeah, so the majority of people did not want to go to war with Ukraine.
Mhm,
I have people that I'm close to here that have traveled to Ukraine in their childhood. Russians would mainly go to Ukraine and for
mhm,
vacation or to see a family member. It would be like, for example, it would be like Lebanon and Syria going at it.
mhm,
They're not exactly the same people, but they're almost the same people. Like
right,
they have so many connections. So what ended up happening was that after the war, Lenin divided up these regions. And the way he divided it up was a real fuck up, because what ended up happening is that there were a majority of ethnic Russians in areas that were marked Ukraine. And after the Nazis lost, there ended up being a lot of groups of those that stayed in that region, and they
mhm,
hated these Slavs, not just the Russians, but anybody of Slavic descent. And a lot of people who were Romani, or what we would call quote unquote gypsies, and all of these people that the Nazis didn't like. So what that pretty much just continued building and building. And so the United States, of course, exploited the situation as they always
mhm,
did. And for years had been pushing and pushing. There was the Orange revolution, or the Orange Revolt, that happened, I believe, in 2006 or around that time. There was already tension there. And so by the time Victoria Nuland, Jeffrey Pyatt, and all these people went in to take out Yanukovych and replace him, that's when, of course, everything hit the wall. And that was a US backed coup, the Maidan coup of 2014. And 14,000 plus people died during that time, ethnic Russians. And you had the second largest party, the Communist Party of Russia, pushing Putin and saying, why aren't you going in? Why aren't you going in? You need to go in. You had a lot of people who were, especially in these regions, saying, we need to defend these people. There's children being killed. This is ridiculous. This is awful. And Putin wasn't going in for a variety of reasons. Russia wasn't in a position to go in. And a lot of things shifted in these 8 years, where now then you had, of course, the special military operation, when obviously every single red line that Russia had demanded, because in my opinion, Russia has been far too diplomatic with the West. This is coming from a perspective of like them crossing every single red line, expansion to the east, expansion, not one more inch. NATO continued to expand. They continued breaking every single promise, not
mhm,
respecting the Minsk Accords. Nothing was respected. And so you're right. Putin was pushed to the point where if he didn't do that, it would look bad. It would be bad. And these are Russians. And so that ended up happening. And that is the reason that is understood in factually as to why Russia went to war. They didn't want to go into a war. A lot of people were against him doing that because they had, family because they see each other as similar people.
Mhm,
Nobody wanted that war, but the United States needed that war.
mhm.
Europe, the collective West, they needed that war. And so what we're seeing here is the result of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's them essentially being sacrificed on the altar of Western imperialism. So,
Mhm.
at the Ukrainian people's sake, tons of Ukrainians have to die to basically weaken Russia, so that way, the U.S. doesn't have a competitor. When um, it's
They
so
go after China.
mind-bog, yeah, it's so mind-boggling to me that we have lots of food in this country. I mean, to the point that 88% of people are considered metabolically unwell here in the U.S.
Yeah.
And RFK is right about pointing out like the health crisis. He's wrong on some like the root causes. He's not perfect on that, but I'm glad that that's in the conversation. But to
Mhm.
that point, we could sell China and Russia food, and then we could get oil and technology from China. But instead, we want to finger wag and saber rattle about this kind of stuff rather than saying, "Hey, why don't we all be friends?" And like, "Hey, we could trade this stuff and make everybody's lives better." But instead, once again, we sacrifice Ukrainian blood on the altar of Western imperialism, and then hopefully not, but it does seem to be going towards that way. That we're going to be sacrificing Taiwanese lives on the altar of Western
Yeah.
imperialism to basically weaken China and Russia to make them, a global hegemon over the rest of the world.
Yeah. Well, just let me say one thing on that. Like,
Of course.
the point of going after Russia isn't just to balkanize Russia, because that's
Mhm.
obviously the plan. That was the plan when during the Soviet Union, because like I said, there's so many resources and so many different groups that they could try to potentially balkanize Russia. That's the whole point of Navalny.
Mhm.
That was the whole point of trying to try Putin out and try to instigate these things from the youth, because that's where it
Mhm.
always comes from. You always go for the youth, because in the youth, oh, the
Yeah.
youth want to overthrow the president. Oh, look, this is what they want. It's going to be very difficult for people to do that, because in spite of the fact that there are problems in Russia, just like there are in any other country, the people are united in terms of what they see as a greater threat, which is right now the West. And so there is unity mostly in that matter. Of course, there are dissidents. Of course, there are people that want nothing to do with anything, but just like in the States. But at the end of the day, the people who are the loudest are the ones that are really pushing this. But all behind all of that, Russia is China, and
Mhm.
as you mentioned, Taiwan. But even beyond Taiwan, the United States feels they need to take down Russia in order to get to China, because
Yeah.
China is the bigger threat economically
Mhm.
and politically and in many other ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of why I do a lot of when I talk about foreign policy, I always try to lead with China because as they've all said, that's the big one. I mean, Jake Sullivan, all the people running our government right now, Sullivan, Blinken, Lloyd Austin, all the worst people on the face of the planet are all for this. And this all started with Barack Obama. But Trump had taken up the mantle and really sold that to the right wing of America is that, hey, you know what, we can't fight terror wars anymore, but we really got to pick a fight with Russia, China, and Iran that axis of evil. And a little bit to Trump's credit, he did kind of settle things with North Korea. And then, of course, as soon as Biden gets in, he made sure he shredded up every last little bit of diplomacy with that and made sure, hey, let's put nukes over in South Korea. But this narrative has really been sold to people that we got to fight a war with China. We can't be friends with Russia when really I think it's the exact opposite.
Yeah, I mean, we should. I mean, if in a perfect world, the United States would be, we wouldn't have NATO. We wouldn't have a necessity for NATO. NATO shouldn't
Right.
exist, right? We wouldn't have
Absolutely.
that. It would be something like BRICS or something like that's very cooperative. Because if you look at the BRICS members, a lot of them disagree on ideology. You like
Mhm.
not, you know, no. China isn't asking everybody to become a communist country in order to join BRICS. That's not what's happening. Every country is giving their input, and they've even said it as much. We're like a family, but we're not, we
Mhm.
don't have to agree on every single thing, and that's it. And it's all go back to national sovereignty, respecting national sovereignty, respecting what other countries do. And like, beyond something like what's happening in Gaza, the genocide, that's something that you just don't sit by and let happen. And that's
Right.
something that I've been critical of every single country, because there is more that could be done. The fact that Israel can just go wantonly, continuing to kill people, continuing to do what they do, even beyond Gaza and all of these other countries. And, then Iran is the bad guy, or,
Mhm.
Russia's the bad guy, or Venezuela. Let's focus on Venezuela while Israel is slaughtering all of
Mhm.
these people. Like,
Absolutely.
it's ridiculous to me, when we talk about democracy and dictatorships and all of that. Even if that were to be true, Israel literally completely debunks everything you're saying, because clearly it doesn't matter. They can genocide a bunch of people. They can do as they please and continue to receive funding to do it, and
Mhm.
continue to be made the victims. And so, I think that when we talk about a potential multipolar world and all of these things that are happening, it's good to not have rose-colored glasses on. It's good to understand it's going to take some
Mhm.
time. It's good to understand that it doesn't mean that everybody's going to agree, but that
Mhm.
would be a nice day if the United States would be a country that could cooperate with everybody else, and we could see some gains and actually, export something, because we import everything. and
Mhm.
and other than, of course, war and guns and all of that. It would be nice to do something productive and build our own things, and become a country that is, actually something to be proud of. But right now, that's not where we're at.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the whole Israel situation, I always say that pretty much every accusation against China is usually true when it comes to Israel. When you go down the line of genocide, stealing our technology, and all these other things, you just go down the line. And yeah, I mean, we've really lost all moral high ground when you've funded Israel to the hilt, especially over the last 8 months. But I mean, even if you go back to
Yeah.
Israel's founding in 1948, we have no moral high ground if you continue to supply arms and fund Israel. And once again, people can sit there and scream about the Ukraine funding, but a lot of those same people ain't willing to touch Israel funding, and they have been the number one recipient of U.S. aid money. I want to throw a shout out to my buddy B for gifting 5 memberships real quick. I know you're on a little bit of a time crunch. I think we're right at the end of the show, but I just want to ask you, what
Mm.
kind of gives you hope about the future? These kind of conversations really give me hope because I see that we're coming together here from somewhat across the political aisle, but we're also kind of noticing the same problems with our foreign policy and domestic policy, honestly.
Well, I'm hopeful in conversations like this. I'm hopeful that people are fighting against the censorship, fighting against the establishment, finding ways to communicate, continuing to sort of go up the stream and fight, because really that's what's needed. I mean, if we all just shut up and like went away, I think that that would say a lot more. But what I'm seeing from people in the United States is an awakening. I do think that it's coming very, very slowly, unfortunately.
Mhm,
And that's for multiple reasons. It's the propaganda, it's the brainwashing, it's everything. From the moment we're born, we're faced with so much propaganda and a narrative that's pushed to us as children. And it really it's hard because, like, for example, when I was just in Iraq, I got so many messages from people like, oh my god, why are you going there? It's so dangerous. Are you okay? You're gonna have to, wear this and that. And by the way, and I don't know if you know, but in Iraq you don't have to wear a hijab or a headscarf or any of that. Like,
mhm,
if you don't want to, it's not mandatory. In Iran, you should be wearing a headscarf. But I when I go to these countries, I, pretty much follow the customs of whatever, because, like, if I'm a guest, I'm not gonna sit there and whatever. If I don't have to wear one, I won't. But there was this town that we went to called Karbala, where they did recommend like wearing the full thing. And so I wore like something covering myself and stuff. But it was basically an event where you had to we were watching the people that were doing this pilgrimage for a martyr, and it was on the anniversary of him. But it turned into basically an entire rally for Gaza, and it was at least 27 million people come to take like
whoa.
this pilgrimage from all over the world. And they go to this little place, Karbala, in Iraq, and they take like, 3 to 5 days to reach it, and then they go back to where they came from. And you can't even drive through. We had to take a helicopter, and I'm going to be posting more about that. It's just phenomenal. It was a phenomenal time, just watching these people. And they have this sort of experience that I think it's hard for us in the West to understand, of martyrdom and of like,
Mhm,
sharing this collective thing, in this whole pilgrimage that people take. They they're given like food, they're given shelter. So it's kind of almost biblical in that way. Like they're given everything they need and each other helps, and there's no like super organized way of it, but everybody helps in and somehow it works out. And
Mhm.
that's kind of how it is in the Middle East, like, and in a lot of Latin America. Um, and so it was very interesting to see that, and I think it was something that would be very difficult for people in the US to understand, because when we look at like this definition of collectivism that we've been pushed on, it's been pushed on as this like lacking freedom of somebody's going to tell me what to do, we're not going to have anything, everything's going to be taken away from me. And I don't necessarily think that's what the actual definition of that means. I think
Mhm.
that we have been so fear mongered into having any sort of community because of just how our government is malfunctioning, and how a lot of these institutions that have used these sort of words have malfunctioned, that when it happens in another country, we just can't wrap our head around it. And what I saw was just that it was like a collectivist little society being created, and it worked out pretty well. And
Mhm.
people were there, and security was there, and it was just very interesting. And I say that because we're coming into what 22 years almost since the war in Iraq, and it's taken over a majority of our lifetimes. And that was a major thing that affected a lot of us and that really impacted us, the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, and all of these wars there, and they still continue. We're still seeing the continuation, maybe not directly, maybe via proxy, but it's still there. And so it's seeing the release also of these pictures by the New Yorker of these families that these soldiers, these US soldiers killed, and these 24 people they killed, including children. I mean, that just shows you what is done in our name that we're not okay with.
Mhm.
And just going there, meeting how these normal these people are, and how they just do the normal things that you and I would do, really just completely shifts your point of thinking. And I think more people need to do that, and that gives me hope that there's a lot of us that are seeking to make these connections with each other, and that I think if we all do it simultaneously at one point or another, it's going to have some sort of impact.
Yeah, well, that's a really beautiful perspective, and yeah, I definitely agree that more people should kind of communicate with people outside of the U.S. because, I'm trying to remember who it is. I think it was Nick from RBN had said that the U.S. is the most propagandized country in the entire world, and
It is.
yeah, absolutely, because you would think over in the Middle East that there's just it's barren, basically like no
Yeah.
civilization there, but the read that I've got from a lot of people is that no, it's actually very cultural and something like that, where it's just like
Yeah.
I don't want to say a decentralized thing, but just a whole bunch of people that got organized together to pay respects to, a situation like that is just really, really awesome. So, yeah, go ahead, give your plugs. Let everybody know where they could find you. I really, really enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much for the conversation. You guys can find me on Rumble at Fiorella in Moscow, or Fiorella Isabel. You'll find me either way. You can find me on X/Twitter at Fiorella Isabel M. And you can also find me on Telegram at Fiorella in Moscow. I don't have a YouTube anymore personally, but we do have the combo couch, and I'll be there tomorrow with pasta. We'll be going live there. But yeah, my YouTube got taken down. So I'm obviously against any sort of censorship. This is a major issue for me. And I hope everybody continues the fight against that.
Absolutely. Well, give Pasta my regards, and we'll definitely have to do this again sometime because, like I said, I really enjoyed this conversation. But yeah, if you don't got anything else, we'll close her out there.
All right. Thank you so much.
All
See you
right.
next time.
Of course. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Until next